Hemshech Hayim Beis, Volume 1, or middle of chapter 175, page 356. So we're moving along and understanding the two levels of Torah, Klal and Prat as he calls it. The general picture of Torah, that's Shashui HaMelech Ba'atzmusei, Shashuim Lefonov, V'ye Etzlei, Amen. And then the Torah, as it comes into Apratim, in specific time and space, which David HaMelech is referring to, Zmiras Ha'yelichu Kecha. So the higher level is completely beyond existence. The lower level has some relationship with existence that you can say that the whole world is dependent on one digduk kal, on one specific detail of the Torah, which consoled, and David HaMelech rejoiced in that, which helped him transcend his difficulties. But the higher part of Torah, like he calls Kol HaGilum, they say, the way the Torah is called miyuchedes, the way it's united, the way it's one with its source. And now we learn in chapter 175 that the Geras HaKedesh, the Kunter Sachar, and when he brings this, he says, Amen, and he brings from the Medrash, Al Tikra Amen Ella Oyman. So he asks for Tzarech Lahav and Eicha Torah, Madreg Zur Nikra B'Shem Oyman. How can you call it something that is having an impact? We call a nurturer, an educator, when it is completely beyond existence. So he explained, in other words, Chetzeni Satera, we can understand how you call Eiman, but not Primis Satera. So he explained, Yashlemer, because since the whole point of Torah, Kol Satera, is there should be Schabros Ed and Sofem Elamus. There should be a fusion, a union, a joining of godliness in the world, which means the entire Torah, not just the lower level of Torah, all of Torah, and specifically with souls. Why? Because without the Torah, you can't have this union completely, because Atzmus Ein Sof, the source itself, cannot, nothing can receive it. And it cannot manifest in anything, only through Torah, because the Torah, as he says, Be'emes, is Atzmus Ein Sof. And that's what gives the power for us to be able to receive, like he brought from Tanya, Perek Lamed Vav, Torah being a divine wisdom, divine force, you can say, a divine agent, is able to give the power to the tzaddikim to be able to receive, that they should not become completely annihilated. He doesn't explain how Torah does it, but clearly Torah does that. And he brought that's the level of Tal Torah. As we learned before, Tal Torah, not Motar, is like a matana. It comes from above. It doesn't come through human effort. Do falls on its own. And that's why he concludes, that's why, so in other words, since the Torah is a keli to receive, because the Torah says V'haya Etzlei Amen, meaning I was by him, Amen, I am his so-called intimate, nurtured intimately by him, meaning by the Eibishter. Etzloi Dafke means the premise, it's one with, that's why I can be a Oyman, I can also nurture. So that's what the Torah is. So the Torah has a double function. If the Torah was not a keli to Atzmus, then it could not transmit it. Being that it's like someone that's coming from the intimate world of Elokus, it can convey that and give us the power. It's basically, think of it like this. Someone who was nurtured and educated and cultivated by Elokus can then become in turn a cultivator, so to speak. So essentially, he's really saying that the Chetzenius Torah, the way the Torah speaks to the worlds, it's really conveying to us that which was Hey Etzli. It could have been two ways. It could have been David HaMelech in a way separated the two. He said the Shvach, he said he was Meshabeach, he praised the Torah Zmiris. What about Shashrim Lefonov? He ignored, he disregarded, which is why he was admonished. In truth, it's the other way around. The Torah, as it comes to us, is really Shashrim Lefonov speaking to us. That's why I asked the question, why can't you say David meant that? But clearly, by being Mishabeach, if he had just recognized that it's affecting him this way, it's one thing. But in a sense, it was too much li, basically, too much focus on the li. I mean, I don't know if he's going to answer this, but that's what it appears. But regardless, what he's saying clearly is that the Amen, which is Altikra, is Oyman. Basically, the Vav after the Mem makes Torah being a Makabel. The Vav after the Mem, the Vav before the Mem turns it into a Mashpiyah, so to speak. That's the gist of it.
How are you putting it, the Rebbe and the Torah? The Rebbe is also having the same function. He's getting it to the Torah.
Yeah, but the Rebbe, what is? I mean, it's like Yisrael Reisa v'Kutshabrichu Kol Echad. There's three different functions. Yes, we dance Simchas Torah with the Torah. So you have the Torah is this Chachmas V'Tzein Shel Kodol. Torah is the plan. Shomis Yisrael not the plan. The Shomis Yisrael are the implementers. They're b'min nimlach b'nishmasein shel tzaddikim. That's who God wants to fulfill it all. But the Torah is the document by which we follow. B'pashtus hadvarim. Even though he doesn't bring it, but in a way you could say this word that he says al pichsidus, that he says kol ha'teres closing ha'teres lios is chabas and sofim elements. You could say is exactly the lashon of the Rambam in the end of Hilchos Chanukah. Le'nit netera elo l'aseh shalom ba'elam. Which would mean that even the Primis HaTorah, even the Shashrim Lefanov is also to make Shalom B'Elam. So it's also, in other words, basically it's like in Torah there's two elements. There's a dimension of Torah that relates to existence. There's a dimension of Torah that doesn't relate. But what he's saying is that even that which relates to existence is also informed by the level that doesn't relate. That's beyond. He's going to definitely elaborate. So now he continues. Now he starts. Va'inyan hu. Based on this, I should add that you could say why the Alter Rebbe is bringing the Tanya, the Al Tikra. What is he adding? Because he's saying that's what David missed. Al Tikra. No, you could say Amen. Amen was what was basically telling you that even as you are learning Torah below, you have to always remember that it's really Amen. Meaning Shashem Lefanov. Yeah. Va'inyan hu. So now he begins a new sugya, a new department, new section. The Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe, when he writes a summary for this Maimer, it's the last Maimer he called Mamutza. Torah is the Mamutza, the interface. This Maimer he says, it's basically he wrote a few words, a few lines, what he calls Teichen Hascholos HaMaimer. So the Friedrich Rebbe calls this Hevdul Sheben Iskashrus V'Dveikus. The difference between connecting Hiskashus and Dveikus, which is what we're going to go into now to understand the role of Torah.
That's printed by every base.
Yeah, it's printed in the beginning. You'll see Teichen Hascholos HaMaim. Va'inyan hu, the inyan in this is like this. Din is bar le'el perikuv samar beis, because now it was explained earlier, chapter 162. That's a while back. Let's see. Just to refresh myself. What's 162? Anybody has a fresh picture of 162? The whole chapter about the Mamutza. Okay. The whole chapter about Stakel Barais. Explained in chapter 162, Doham Tsoy, the Teira, who were based in Yon. That the interface of Teira, the Teira as an interface, as an intermediary, is in two things. B'yisavas elemis. One is in creation of the world, like we learned the Stakel Barais, Kutsha B'richas Stakel Bora Alma. Or B'yischabas in the Erein Sofim elemis. So it's in the process of creating the world, like we've been talking many times. Push of the creation. They created it in this orderly way. And Teira is the blueprint which he used to create. But also, it's an emtsoi in uniting and joining the infinite divine light with the worlds. Which is a very important point, because imagine a blueprint, an architect creates a blueprint, you build a house according to the blueprint. And that's it, then you don't need to refer to the blueprint anymore. But Teira remains a force in our lives, because the end of the second half of the Zayed is Kach Barnash Osik B'Teira V'Kaima Alma. So it's not just a blueprint the way God created the world. It also remains a blueprint for us to reconnect. So you could say one is like Mamayel Lamata, one is Mamat Lamata. Even the second one is also Mamayel Lamata. But the bottom line is it's not just for creation purposes, it's also for Kiyum Eilemis purposes. For sustaining and building the worlds. One second. Yeah. And these two things are on the two levels of Teira. The Teira k'moshi bizgalu sarihu memutze shal yodehu savas elemis. The Teira, as it manifests in a revealed way, as we spoke, Megillah Nitna, that's a memutze, an interface through which the worlds are brought into being. The Gamzeh b'chinas Teisa said be'elemis u'k'moshi izbar. This too is an additional increased energy into the worlds, as we shall explain.
What does it mean? He's talking here about his savus and he's creating.
But Pashtus, he means that when you learn Nigla the Teira, the God of the Teira does not just give. In other words, God could have created the world without Teira, so to speak. That would have been the minimum maintenance, so just giving life to existence. But even the outer dimension of Teira also adds more than
in creation.
Yeah, that's what it looks like he's saying. Yeah. He says Kamoshi is bar, so clearly he's going to explain it, right? And the Teira, the higher level, the way the Teira is his core and essential delights. So this becomes a joining of the infinite divine light with the souls of Israel. This, because this is the ultimate inner purpose. That there should be the connection, the binding of Yisrael with the souls. And because of this, and due to this, the Teira is called Eiman. So in other words, what he's saying here is this. The Teira as a blueprint for creation is Takanat Eiman. That, even though it is, because it says it's the blueprint. Yeah, but he was saying Al Shem Zay Schabes himself in Neshama Yisrael. That's even more. So it's not just for the creation purposes. Creation, he says Al Shem Zay Nikrat Teira Eiman, not on the first one. So he doesn't say Al Shem Zay by the creation. He's talking about now Chabrus. Okay, so clearly there's two things here. Yeah, we have to figure out how it stems with Medrash, but he's clearly saying it's not. But he's saying that. He said there's two things in Torah. One is the creation, and one is the ischabros. He says Al Shem Zeh on ischabros, not on creation. On creation, he doesn't say Oimon. Just pointing what he's saying. That's what he's saying here for sure. The question is what it means in Medrash. We'll see. He says that also has an additional element, but let's first speak. So in other words, what he's explaining here is that the Torah relates to existence, the creation of the world. There too there's an additional element to this. But the Torah Shashuyim, Hashem Ziknikra Eman, is how it's not just Shashuyim Lefanov, it's also nurturing the Neshamas Yisrael. It's connecting them to godliness. Ve'emer al zeh, and he says on this, Ve'eye etzli amoy. Shezeu ha-Torah k'mo shehi etzli, dafke b'china Shashuyim atzma.
So Oymen is a lower darga kaviyachol?
Oymen is always a lower darga, that's for sure. Al tikra.
The mashpia is lower than the...
No, the makabel is lower. Oymen is the makabel, is mashpia.
Oymen is the mashpia.
To lower, to a lower level.
Right, so Oymen is lower than Oymen, or Omen.
Yeah. So Oymen al zavei etzle Omen. Shezeu ha-Torah k'mo shehi etzle dafka. That's what it says. Etzle. That's the way the Torah is by him. Dafka b'china Shashuyim ma'atzm. His core essential delights. The Torah and with Eibishter are one. All this is referring to the higher level, not the lower level of Torah. Basically, what he's adding here is that Al Tikra teaches us that the higher level of Torah also has another function. It's not just Hashem Lefanov, it nurtures and binds, connects, is chabrus of Ein Sof im Neshamas Yisrael. That's what he's saying. As opposed to the lower level of Torah, which only refers to creation of existence. We still need to understand, because I believe in Medrash, the Al Tikra is used to explain the Torah as a blueprint to create existence, a lower level. But that's how he's teaching it here, and that's how he brings it in Tanya. I must say the English translation actually does convey how it's explained here, because that's what it says there. See there, when you look in the Kudas Achim, he just says Al Tikra Amen Ela Oyman. Doesn't go into the specifics that he says here. Okay. We have to learn. But listen, he's teaching it to us. Obira Inyan. And the explanation of this is the Hina Yudua Maimar Azoyar, because it's known the Maimar, the statement in the Zohar, Tlas Kshorin Miskashin Dobedo Kuchabricha Reis Kishin. I said that. Because Kishin, it's in Aramaic. In Hebrew you say Kshorim. In Aramaic you say Kishin. Tlas Kishin, 3 connections. 3 knots, you can say. Miskashin Dobedot, that are bound to one another. Kuchabrichud, Eibishter, Raisa, Teira, and Yisrael. So here we go. Here he's going to explain now the whole so-called dynamic. Hishkashrus is possible when there's 2 things that are separate from one another. You need a knot. If they're one thing, you don't need to connect them. You don't say a rope, one rope is hishkashrus. You don't say something that's made up of a bunch of pieces is connected to one another. Because kashrus means to hear 2 ropes, and you want to bind them together, you make a knot that connects them. It's not nice if I have one in his kashrus. His kashrus Rebbe means, because if you're one with him, you don't need to be mukusher. Mukusher means you're connecting yourself, and that's your choice. That's why you could have, now his kashrus you cannot have. To say, for example, sunlight, the light of the sun is mukusha to the sun, is not a logical statement. Because the sun, the light, the Chatchila never has any personality of its own. To be a Mechuz Davar B'fnei Atzmo, to be a separate entity. And Gilim and Etzem, all it is revealing the core, the source. That's why it's not possible to say it is kashrus, binding. Ki'im, what do you call it? Dveikus. There in Hebrew you'd call it dveikus. Dveikus ha'oyer ba'amoyer. Dveikus means not connection. A dveikus is like a cleaving in Hebrew. Yeah, so dovuk. Dovuk means something is stuck to it. It's like glued to it. And obviously here it's not physically glued, because glued also, we glue, let's say, two things, also glue. We're not talking about that type of glue. Dveikus really means cleaved. That's in Hebrew, cleaving. In English, cleaving to. So it's a dveikus. Basically, iskashus means two entities, you tie them together. Think of it like two ropes, you made a knot. By light, you can't say that. It's not the sun is here and the light is here and you made a knot. Dveikus is a type of, it's like when two flames come together. You don't see, they become so much one that you can't separate. But there is two entities, but not two separate entities.
So it's meduyak.
Yeah.
It's kashrus, it's mekushel. That's meduyak.
Very meduyak.
Because some people could be not mekushel.
Yeah, you could have dveikus and not iskashus.
No.
Yeah.
Can be.
Eir doesn't have any personality of its own. It's like
much more than it's kashrus.
Hashkus is well, it's more and also less. Depends how you define it. What's higher, a shliach, shluch shalom kameseh, or an eved? An eved you could say is dovuk, because kol mashal kana eved kana rabbi, right? And a shliach is a badas b'fnei atzmei that becomes, that's why eved can be shluch shalom kameseh. So you can say, why not? He's completely no separate entity. He's been a real true eved.
It's more than shliach in
It's something
More and less, also less.
because it has no das atzmei.
Right, because so there's no.
it's like you rechush, it's not you. Dveikus is in gilui min ha'etzem. Eved is not gilui min ha'etzem.
We're not talking about Gilui now. We're talking about, however, the connection is one. Because kol masha kana eved kana rabbi. Okay. Kim dveikus shu dovuk u'miyuchad ba'etzem. It's bound and united with the core, with the source. Now he says in the parentheses, he says, this is in general the level of Eir. So Eir in general compared to, and I think not Eir is Dveikus, but the fact is in the detailed levels of Eir, there's also levels in Eir. There are levels where there's Iskashus that's not in the form of Dveikus. In Eir itself, there are levels. There are levels where Eir, like Eir Kol Ba'etzem, is Mamish Dovuk. But then as Eir gets diminished and it leaves and it travels downward, there are levels where the Eir is somewhat distant from the source and it constantly needs a renewal. We learned that earlier a little about the Rotzev Veshuv. It needs a constant renewal. Then you call it that it's not so dovuk. It's not in the same level of dveikus. He's just qualifying this in the parentheses. It means because it feels a distance, it needs to constantly be refreshed. Like it needs a refreshal. The air that's really dovuk, that continuously dovuk, doesn't need to be refreshed. He's just saying, in air itself, there's a level where you have iskashus that's not mamish dveikus. Raklos air is dveikus. But in general, air is dveikus. Let's say, for example, the difference between air and yesh. Or, we'll call it the difference between air and yesh. The difference between so air, take away the moyer, the air disappears. However, let's say we talk about ilul, if I give you, let's say, a cup of water, so even if you have the cup of water, it's separate from the source. So you bring me mekusher to it, but you're not dovuk to it. That's in general what air is. But in air itself, it can be an air that has traveled a long distance, so it still has an element. That's all he's saying in the parentheses. He's just qualifying for Shleima Seinya. So in Eir and Moed you can't say Skashus. You have to say it's two separate things. He's explaining the Zohar that used the word kishrin, miskashrin. That's what he's explaining now, okay? Well, the fees there, now comes a parenthesis which is like around 10 lines. 8 lines. Well, the fees there in the parenthesis, the vekus, will the mailam miskashris. Oh! Kivanu, mimgeret veganda. According to this, the vekus is higher than iskashris. Why? Because the vekus clearly is a far deeper connection than iskashris, which is two separate things. Ubiyuri hazer pasha truma. Issa diskashris yesem mit vekus. Biyur hazer pasha truma. This would be the biyur hazer of the Mittler Rebbe, which is essentially the biyur hazer of the Alter Rebbe that he would darshan, says there in Agdoma. Every Friday night, for a period of time, the Alter Rebbe would say a drush on the Zohar of the Parsha. Friday night. And the Rebbe... No, to the family part, not really. I mean, probably some chassidim were there. It wasn't public. Public then was a few people. And the Mittler Rebbe put together and compiled a sefer called Biyuri Hazer. Tzemach Tzedek has also a Biyuri Hazer, which is based a lot on that, with Hagos and his Sofis, and many of his own additions. So Biyur Hazer, Pashat Rumi says his kashrus is deeper, is greater than Dveikus. So he's explaining why. Because the Dveikus is makif. Because Dveikus is in the form of makif. His kashrus is primi. His kashrus is primi. If I recall correctly, the meaning of this is, I have to look it up in Biyur Hazer, but I believe, because that which Eir connects to the Moyer is not mitzad any aveda. It's tchuna. It's nature. So it's makif in the sense it's not psedurig and durach. It's the nature of a thing. Mashenkin is kashrus when something binds itself. If I was separate, that's why I said that's why, and I'm bringing before the shliach and eved. The Rebbe brings it. That's why I'm bringing it. That you don't say by eved. Shall shluchi shall avdei shall melch kamei. You say he doesn't exist. That's what you say. So he's just basically anything. He's kaina. The odin is kaina. By shliach you don't say such a thing.
It's
A makif. It's makif because he basically gave away himself. Yeah, his kashrus, as we spoke the story with I think it was the Motche Tzvi, who was with the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek. He sent him on a shlichus to Peterburg because Tzemach Tzedek couldn't go for Askanos Seburis. So he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe. So this. No. The Tzemach Tzedek sent, I think Motche Tzvi, I think was his name, or Motche Ber, one of these. He should go to Peterburg to deal with something he couldn't deal. So he couldn't go at the time. He used to go to Petersburg. So he asked the Chassid, asked the Tzemach Tzedek, so he said, what to do in the negotiations? So he says, "Zolzboin al das atzmei." You should build it. When the Rebbe Marash heard that, so he thought to himself, he didn't say anything, but he thought to himself, okay, Ba'em is nicht as kashrus as tif. Because das atzmei, So he's good to go, he's about seichel, but he's a das atzmei, he has a lot of his own seichel. Then came Shabbos.
What was the problem for the Marash?
Nothing, he just said that. Das atzmei, the Rebbe said, das atzmei is nicht den ganzen bottle. So then they sat by the Shabbos in Lubavitch, and Tzemach Tzedek suddenly got serious, and he said, Motche Tzvi, and Motche Ber, he has a suffix. And he was serious for a few minutes, and then he smiled, and he said, good. In other words, he resolved it. So Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash had verstanden, verkehrt. If you're a puppet, so gosh, then you're just an extension, and there's no. But it's far deeper to have das atzmei umechaven zayin. That means it's a real hiskashus pnimis. I'm just giving an example. Don't see a makif from pnimi, because he has beferish das atzmei, but he has so trained himself to think like the Rebbe thinks that even when he thinks on his own, it's really he's also aligning himself, which is obviously the ultimate kavanah.
So that's his kashrus.
So his kashrus is deeper than dveikus. What he says in Biyur Hazer, he's just qualifying. He just said that according to what we just were learning here, dveikus is deeper than his kashrus. There he says it. He's explaining. V'yesh lemer. The shom medaber b'dveikus shemetzad ha'elyon. There in Bir Azer, he's speaking the dveikus, says it's from the perspective from above, dainu b'chinas makif levad. So from the perspective of it, it's only in a makif dik way. U'kamoy kasher yidbuk ha'ozer. Kain hidibakti eschem. So ozer is a
belt.
So just like a belt, I guess, binds someone, as man sagt, untergarteln sich, right? Yid because is this a posuk?
Sound like Yechezkel.
Yeah. So the way Yid B'Ka'ozer came he'd bakti eschem. It's like a muscle. So just like a belt binds together, I guess, and holds together, like a gartel, holds together the garment, so too that I bind you. This means like the right arm that embraces, that hugs. Shubchinis makif. So it's like somebody taking and connecting you. The Eibush is taking the Eden and connecting them. It's mamayil lamata. U'kamay hamachabek is chavere, like someone who hugs, embraces his chaver, another, his friend. Shemaikife, he surrounds him. What means embrace? I'm embracing you, I'm taking you around, and I'm holding you, I'm hugging you, I'm embracing you. His kashrus, on the other hand, because this means essentially, it's like we say about kofalem harkikigis. Ava Rabba Yena that the Eibishter gives mamshich. On the other hand, this kashrus is a pnimizdik thing. It's an intimate thing. Because of a nafshik shura b'nafshe, which is by Binyamin and Yankov and Yehuda. So my soul is bound to his soul.
So what does it mean?
It's like real love.
What does it mean?
It means it's not coming from the tachten. There's no pnimizdik effort from the recipient. It's the above, just embraces you. He's binding you. It would be like the Eibush is throwing us a rope and tying us together and keeping us together. His kashrus is nafshik shur b'nafshik, intimate. Aval mamat lamayla hadvekus ubchinas hisachdus yesem is kashrus. So mamayla mata from above, the veikus is lower than his kashrus. Makif and this is primi. But mata lamayla, when you speak from below upward, dveikus is a deeper unity than attachment. The dveikus hu bedavar sheina muhuz b'fnei atzmei, because dveikus is a thing that doesn't have any personality of its own. V'hiskashrus bedavar shu muhuz b'fnei atzmei k'shem mischaber, and hiskashrus binding is in a thing that is a separate personality as it gets attached. Okay, he distinguishes between mamayla mata and mamatla maila. What he means here, mamatla maila, he doesn't mean matla maila mitzad avedim matla maila. That's not what he means. He means when you look at it from below, which is a deeper connection. Dveikus is deeper. Eir is moyer is deeper than 2 knots. But if you look at mamayla mata, meaning from the perspective from above, in a way, yeah. But what's deeper? Yeah. What's more precious? You could say, or yeah. Matlamela he means from the perspective, basically from an outside look. So dveikus is, but from an inside look, so called. So his kashrus is far deeper. The pashtus, yeah.
Because of participation.
Not just because it has participation, because it's it's an intimate connection. The other one is just a makivdika connection. But pashtus and matla maila here means that. It doesn't mean aveda matla, because aveda matla maila actually his kashrus is deeper. He means matla maila from, like when you look from it from an outer look, externally, simply talking technically, scientifically, dveikus is deeper. If you're talking mamayla mata, v'mizet is be'emes, his kashrus is deeper. But pashtus what he means. Regardless, whatever it means, it's clear that it's talking about two separate things. It's not a stira, basically. What says of Yerazer, what it says here is not a stira. Look, Malachim and Neshamas. Malachim can never waver from God's will, and they can never change their Seder Aveda. Michal is always Chesed, Gavriel is always Gvura, Ein Shliach, Ein Malach is Shtei Shlichus. Why? Because it's one kav. The Rebbe compares it when he spoke about chess. If you know chess, it's like the pieces that move, both the rook and the bishop. So they can go all the way across, but only one kav. A pawn goes one step at a time, but it can go in different directions. So in the Neshamas, they come down the matas, mahalchim beina emdim. What means emdim? Malachim can climb very high in Ave, but they can't, it's emdim because it's always in their kav. They don't have a second kav. Neshama can go into the second kav. So which is deeper? Malachim on one hand, Malachim is a deeper because they don't have any rotzen of their own. They can't waver. But B'Pnimiyus Sanyanim, and the Neshama is far deeper because the Neshama can come. That's why Malachim can't come down Lamata and deal with the challenges of this world. They don't have that power. Neshama is, as it says, in Lekus Shanasa Yesh. They come down and Begoli, they're like a Metzias B'fnei Atzmei that does not feel Elikus, but their connection is far deeper, and that's why when they connect through their Bechira and Rotzen, it's a far deeper Skashus than the Skashus of Malach. Just give you an example. So on one hand, a Malach, if you look technically, a Malach is always doing exactly what God wants. He's not shaykh to do anything else. A human being is not like a Neshama could do other things.
You could say
that's Makiv, but that's Makiv because not his own of his no Aveda involved. Here, when you choose, yeah. Okay.
It's like he's saying, it's more his achdus. Dveikus is more his achdus.
Yeah.
Also it's not.
V'zeu sheYisrael miskashram ba'araisa, and now he's going back. What does it mean then? The Zohar that says the word iskashrus, he doesn't use the word dveikus. This is that Yisrael miskashram ba'araisa, that the Israel binds itself, ties itself to Teira, but in Teira, the neshama kamashiyar lebiyah. Oh. Imam is saying this. And the Neshama, as it comes down, the way it comes down biyah, it becomes a yeshu mitzias dover. Even though the root of the soul is not tzilus, Neshama has to be tahiri. Like we say in the morning, the soul you gave me is tahira. What's tahira? Like he says, Ata barasa, Ata yitzata, Ata nefachta bi, Ata meshamra bi kirbi. So Atahira goes on Atzilus, even though the soul is rooted in Atzilus. And more than that, and also the way it comes down in Biyah, meaning as it descends into this world that are separate from it. It's still Elikus Betzim Husa, its fundamental nature is godliness. Nevertheless, it becomes in a state of Yesh. To the extent that it can connect itself, to fuse itself, to tie it, to connect itself, join with the body and the animal soul, and it's contained and grabbed, it's not like Eir HaShemesh, for example, the sunlight shines on earth. It shines on a palace the same way it shines on a pile of garbage. It's not nitfes's begeshem. Eir is not nitfes in geshem. Neshama is nitfes. We learned this earlier. But when neshama comes in the body, it's not like an eir that's detached. Neshama enters the body and is manifest there. That's why by Rabbi Amnuna Saba, Eliyahu Novi couldn't be in two places at once, because when you come in the neshama beguf, the neshama can't be in two places. A nitzutz of the neshama can be by a bris, Pesach, etc. But neshama is nitfes beguf, means they now will work together, and the neshama can't be elsewhere when it comes to the guf. Not like oir. So you see clearly the neshama is nitfes. The oz harihu nasis yeser. The oz harihu nasis yeser b'hakshama. And when it's nitvis, then the neshama also becomes more magushim. It becomes more, let's say, less subtle and more crass.
Neshama d'Atzilus.
He's not talking about neshama. He's talking about regular neshamas now. He's not talking about. But he's talking here about regular neshamas. Most people. You're talking about somebody that bypasses he's talking about neshamas and satabitayr, even a regular soul. Our souls. It's going to be a lot easier to understand if it's to talk about us. Kaneda, as it's known, the commission is bar le'el b'tchilas hadrush. And like we learned earlier in the beginning of the drush, in the beginning of the hemshech, he spoke how keiches hanefesh manifest, like the keich of riyah. It doesn't just derech ma'ivir pass through the eye. It enters into the eye and it's there and it's connected to it and they are affected by each other. Even said there, the different mezag, the different so-called mezag avir. What's the word I use for mezag avir? Environment. The different moods or mezag is the different combinations mezag that affect actually how the nefesh manifests in the body. Quality, that's what I used. Quality, mezek, quality. Okay.
Mezek means that you are combining.
Yeah, mizug. Like, yeah. But mezek avir, for example, there he's talking about mezek also the quality of the air, the quality of the situation affects the. Yeah.
The way that it's combined, the keli. Mezek avir is also the same.
So that's in the neshama. He's explaining now his kashas. Teira, on the other hand, Teira hi chachma lekis. Teira is divine wisdom. Chachmasi v'ritzeni is baruch. The wisdom and the desire of God. So we have here two things. A neshama which is be'etzem elokus comes into a form of yesh and manifests in existence, and the Teira that retains and maintains its divine connection. And nevertheless, b'shas, a person, a soul, is asik. How would you translate asik? Works, exerts. Asik is business. Is also fanemtzach. How do you say it's fanemtzach in English? Involved. Immersed. Immersed in Teira. It's hard to translate. Asik is more than immersed. It means you're learning it in a very intense.
Takes you all well.
Yeah. Asik Teira. Shemasim kol sichli v'ruach b'noseh be'asik zeh, and he places all his intelligence and the spirit of his bina, ruach b'noseh, meaning his whole comprehension. He's focused completely in this asik, in this study, in this immersion. Had it kol keches nafshim misachdim miskalim be'esed davar dvar halacha she'esik ba. All his faculties of the soul are united, umiskalim, and are encompassed in the dvar halacha, in the subject matter that in which he is learning, in which he is immersing himself. Like it says in Tanya, first section, chapter 5, like he says there, what's the Teira, the difference between mitzvahs and Teira? Mitzvah is like a levush. A mitzvah you do. The mitzvah doesn't become one with you. You do a mitzvah, you put on film on your arm. Al. Teira is terashcha b'teich meyai. That's what he says, right? It's like achila. It's not like a garment that you put on. It's like you're eating something, you digest it. Why? Because he says there in Tanya, right, in Perikei, he says when you learn Teira, what happens? Your mind is makif for mukif, mukuf for makif. It's surrounded by, and it surrounds the thing you're learning. So you're completely becoming one with it. It's like a complete joining. Shemalvad shesichle mukif mahadav var halacha. Besides the fact that his seichel, the person who's learning, is surrounded by the dvar halacha, because when you're thinking right now, the halacha, what's happening? Your mind is being encompassed by it. Harigam sichle makif es dvar halacha. In other words, it's like, not I'm just embracing you, you're also embracing me. So the seichel, the halacha is being makif you, And your seichel is being makif it. It's a very, very big difference. So it's a real joining.
Interwoven.
You could say interwoven, fine. Seichel makif van dover halacha regam seichel makif halacha shemeven eisem asigo. He understands it and comprehends it. V'hu yichud nifla she'en yichud kamoy. This is a lashon from Tanya, and this is a yichud nifla, a wondrous union. There's no union like this. V'loy ke'er kenimtze klal b'gashmis. And anything similar that you can find in Gashmis. Such a union where a mind gets completely, they say, there's a word they actually say, a mind fusion, not fusion, a mind. It's a fusion. It's there's a word I wanted to use, not mind. Not wrap. Not just you wrap around. It's like a mind glue. There's a word for it. There's a mind. Anyway, there's nothing similar. He says nothing like it and nothing similar to it in Gashmis. Being united and lachodim, being one and miyuchodim and united, literally united from every side and every corner. Because whatever you join in the physical world, as soon as it's a composite of two things, let's say you mix together, you make a chalt. So you bring a bunch of ingredients, you mix them together. Fine, they become one, they're now all part of it. End of the day, however, they're separate ingredients, you could even separate them, you could even taste the different tastes. It's not one. So even in chemistry, they talk about different composites, that there are elements that work together very well, compounds, that you can mix well. Even how they make it today, they make synthetic materials. Certain things mix very well and so on. But everyone knows, just like you can bring, like it says, the klal and chira is that any davar murkav, anything that's made up of two things, can ultimately be separated. So that's why he's saying there's nothing similar to this. In Gashmis, when you take your mind and you think about an idea, it becomes so bound together that you can't separate between the two. Let's go even further. Once something becomes part of your knowledge, part of your mind, you can't even take it out anymore, even if you want to. Because it's all bound now into your mind. I mean, the only example in Gashmis where you could say something would be similar would be if you bring water together. You mix two bodies of water together, they become so one. But I don't think that's a good example, really, because they're really one in the first place. It's not bringing two separate things. They just, so they join.
It's kamus,
yeah, right. Exactly. Here you are talking a new idea that you're learning something you haven't learned, and you're completely connecting to it. Is that Agdus? Question is that is kashrus or dveikus? Okay, we'll find out in a minute.
This is kashrus.
Balzen. Hagam shenafshei hoyse. We'll see. Hagam shenafshei hoyse b'chinas yesh nifrad latz mekoydem esko b'teira. And even though his spirit, his soul, was a separate entity on its own, independence of it, before he studied Torah, before he immersed himself in the study of Torah, however, during his Asik, not during, when he, by being Asik, by immersing himself in Torah, he's united and miskasheres, and bound in the Divrei Torah. B'dvar Torah, b'divrei Torah. B'dvar Torah. Either one. In the words of Torah. It's like you're binding, actually tying, binding. Torah is binding. One thing with another. And tying them together. Torah, I believe, means to bind, and kesher means to tie. Like Torah, yeah? Yeah. To the point they become united. That's a lashon. Same thing, the nefesh is bound b'tzrei rachayim. It's bound in the. It's interesting. Tzrura b'tzrei rachayim, in the source of life, I guess. That's usually how we translate it. But why is it called Tsurur? Tsurur, it's bound in the binding of life, basically. And like the source of the binding. And becomes united with the Dvar Torah, with the Torah idea, in which he's immersing, engrossing himself, with the entire power of his intelligence and spirit of his comprehension.
What does it mean?
Since it Keach Sichle Ruach B'Nosei, I like that. I suppose that must be a lashon.
Two different things.
Zeu hanikra.
Serim dovel bedovel v'kushim oisem yachad ad shemisachdim. Was meint das?
Okay. What it means is very simple. He wants to say that it's not one. They didn't begin as one. When you sit down to learn Torah, it's not like you're one, you're just going into a body of water. We're talking down on earth. Your body, your soul entered your body. You're living your life. You can be busy in business, in Narishkeit, in anything you want. Now you're sitting down to learn Torah, you're taking your mind, and your mind suddenly unites with something, such a union. So he's saying, but it's not. It's like taking two objects that are separate. You're binding them together. You're tying them together till the point that they become one. Makif or mukaf, like he's explained. That's Pashtus Advarim here. Nothing. He wants to use because he wants to explain his kashrus. That's why he's saying using the lashenus of tying, not dveikus. Remember, the key here is that the neshama as it came down lamata. If you talk to the neshama as lamaila when it's learning, then you could say it's like a fish going into water. Even down here, Rabbi Akiva said the mashal, that's like water for us. But still, as the neshama is mislabish beguv, the fact is, we are begoli not connected to Torah. So it's like two separate things. The yesh, we're talking the neshama as it's a yesh. Obviously, Primus and neshama wants to learn and it's connected. We're talking now as it's expressed in the Chetzenis Dika world. When you do the mitzvah of Limud Torah, what's happening? You're taking the neshama as it's a yesh in a body, and manifest and all that it says here, contained, and you're connecting it to a unity that is in Yichud Kameyu. That's what he's saying, basically. I mean, that's what it is. It's very balabatish so far, the Fierach. V'zeu hanikra kesher v'yichud. This is called a bind and a unity. Shemechabrim dover nifred. That you could bind something that is separate. Kamay hanefesh shemesached is b'teira. Like a nefesh that's united with teira. Remember, he said even though the sheidish and neshama is not silus, and even down below it's still a lakus, but bottom line, it did manifest in a body. V'zel lefish hanefesh hu lakus be'etzem. Now he's explaining why does it bind taka so well. That's because the nefesh is be'etzem, it's alakus. Alkein hu misachid be'oskei b'teira be'bechinas esagdosh mamish. That's why he unites in his studying Torah mamish in a unifying way, which needs explanation. Because the mashal in Tanya, Mukav Seichel, is even when you're studying science. What's that? No Torah. When you study any wisdom, it doesn't even have to be Torah. You're also completely Mukav Seichel and Makiv Seichel. So I believe that the Rebbe answers that in Ha'ara and Tav Shalom Ches. I think Matzoi Simchos Torah, that first sikha after the heart attack. The Rebbe wrote a footnote. I think that answers that question. I have to look it up. I don't remember right now. 1 second. Al Kaponim, but he's saying because the nefesh is be'etzem elikus, that's why it gets so united. But at the end of the day, it's a unity that begins of two separate things on a revealed level, on an outer level. Now he's going on. Now he continues. V'hinei now b'chol kesher tzarich li is beis ksharim zeh im zeh zeh al gab zeh. V'imlei ein kesher shel kiyama. In every bind, in every knot, you need to have two knots. Zeh al gab zeh. I think even halacha. For it to be a kesher shel kayama, you don't just tie it once, you tie it twice. to be an enduring bind. So what's this basic ksharim? So he's going to explain. What does it mean in Aveda, these two ksharim? Learning Torah. That this Aveda has to be with love and awe or respect. Torah without love and Aveda without love. Tchila is love. And Rechimu is Yira.
No, Rechimu is love.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Tchila is Gevura, right? Correct. Yira, the Rechimu is love. It does not fly, it does not soar. It does not take wing. Parcha is from the word fly. And it's not at all called a bind. Because the Torah remains down below and doesn't fly, doesn't soar. Like Parcha Nishmasan, that their souls. But Parchas Leila is, but it says Zayad, it brought in Tanya in later chapters, the Mems, where it talks about the wings, that are eif, of a bird without wings. So it's like a grounded bird. Ki'im tzarech liyas avaviyira, it has to have avaviyira, love and awe. And through this, his exertion, his immersion in Torah, diligent immersion in Torah, miskasher, his soul gets bound with the Torah and united with it. United in it. So this is the connection. Now we just studied the connection of Torah and Yisrael, a Raisa of Yisrael. But the Zohar says another kesher. There's a kesher of Kuchabrichu. Same thing. He says the same thing in the bond. In the bind or the bond between Torah and God, just like there's an infinite distance between a nefesh, which is a finite, a confined soul, spirit, with a Torah, which is divine wisdom, even more so, more distant, in a reich of Torah with the core of Elokus. Because we say in Atzmus, on the core of divine energy, we say, and light, is Chakim, is wise, but not with knowable wisdom. And he's separate, qualitatively separate from wisdom. Till Chachma, compared to him, to the core, is called Asiyah. Kulam b'chachma asisa. But Pashtas Kulam b'chachma asisa means you made everything with chachma. But it also means that chachma is Asiyah compared to you. Kulam b'chachma asisa. In other words, the asisa gate of chachma. Need that you made it with, right? Kulam b'chachma asisa.
Chachma and Asiyah are equal, but that's not the pshat.
Yeah. So we see from here that the Torah, as it is wisdom, we're talking now. We're obviously going to learn that the Torah also is beyond wisdom. But we're talking about the Torah as Chachma, is like B'chachma Yediyah, Shalei Berach.
He said before that the Torah is Atzmos.
He said Tainuk, yeah. But right now he's trying to compare. He's saying, how could you say Skashus of Torah and Kudsha B'richu? They're one. So he says they're not one. They're also separate. So obviously it means Torah here as it comes down, obviously. V'yeshleimer, and he says in the parentheses here, Al pi mashin is bar le'el perek memtes. We can say, according to what we learned earlier, chapter 49, by a hefresh ben arotzen l'kechas hanefesh, we learned there the difference between desire and the faculties of the soul. So the difference is the faculties manifest each in a specific. Eir is bikelim, eir pnimi, and rotzen is makif. It doesn't have a particular local location. So what we learn there? That rotzen ain't a dovel atzmei chutz la'atzmus hanefesh. Rotzen, desire, is nothing separate from the core nefesh. Avla keiches k'mei keich haseichel harihu keich la'atzmei chutz la'atzmus shel hanefesh. Rotzen, what's rotzen? Rotzen is what the nefesh wants. It doesn't have a personality of its own. Keiches, on the other hand, like keich haseichel, for example, has a very particular personality. Is the power of intelligence. So keich la'atzmei, it's a faculty on its own that's outside of the atzmus hanefesh. You can't say when the nefesh expresses itself, it's seichel. He spoke there about nefesh hasichlis. Nefesh hasichlis is an expression of the soul, but you cannot say it's the full expression. It has a particular function. She's saying an example. Similarly, also like this, you could say same thing you could say chachma lamayla. What's chachma lamayla? What's chachma above? That's the chachma of Torah. It's already something of substance. That's a chachma. It's not just rotzen. The atzmas ein sof ain't begeder chachma, and kor ein sof is not begeder chachma. So as soon as you say Torah is chachma, you're already saying it's something that's outside of the source, relatively speaking, even though it's chachma of the source. Obviously, you'll say one second, but Torah is also the tzena shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. But he's not talking about that part. He's talking about the Torah as it's in chachma now. Like it says, chachma, from where do you come? So the diuk here is ma'ayin. It comes from ayin. It's not a question, it's like a statement. Chachma, shenimtzaros ma'ayin b'pchinas mitzias yesh. Why do you say chachma ma'ayin timotza? Because chachma is not ayin. Chachma is already a state of yesh that's coming from ayin. That from ayin emerges a state of yesh. That's why when you think of an idea, you say, where did it come from? The ma, where did it come from? The ma is the ayin, that you don't know. What you do know is that I have an idea right now. It's only a spark, but it's an idea. Like the Maimon in Zayah that says Abba Yenik, that Abba Chochmah nurses, suckles from Mazlo. Mazol is besides levad, just like a mazel. A mazel is only like a strand. It's only coming in a very, very diminished flow, like a strand of hair from arich, from the unconscious, like we learned. And that's why we say in Lamed Beis Nesivus, there are 32 paths of Chachma. That Chachma is a Nesiv. It's a path. So it's a diminished state. He's bringing a proof that Torah, as its Chachma, is more distant from Kodesh Baruch Hu than even Yisrael is from Torah. How
do you see it at small distance?
He's elaborating here. We just said he brought 4 or 5 different explanations.
That is a distance, but it's small distance.
Yeah. Because Alakus is not even the gather of Chachim. Chachim believe a Chachim idea. You do, and it's known the difference between a sieve, a path, and a derech, and a road. Basically, the derech or davarachav. When you say derech, a road is a wide thing. It's a wide path. Shahilchem by bizgalus. You travel through it in a revealed way. Basically, means an expanded way. You're an expansive. You don't have to force yourself.
It's a way.
So it's a road, a highway. Derech HaMelech, exactly. You go to Moscow, you see a Derech HaMelech. Because King Peter the Great, the armies, when they would go down, they have a highway. You go out, it's like Azah. Yeah. From those days still, they tell you, it's a highway that's like, because they wanted when the soldiers would go and come, that's a Derech HaMelech. At least it's not six lanes. It's like 50 lanes.
Wow.
Very, very wide. You ever been there? Yeah. Yeah. Mazet is gleich. From where the Kremlin is. So when the road goes out, it's very, very, very wide. It gets narrower later. Ganzen Breitkeit. Made, you know when the king comes on, from start, from outside, the whole recipient, not... And a path is short and narrow, and
narrow and also concealed. No,
Mitzumtzum also means narrow and verquetscht.
Concealed means you going
limited.
small cloud.
Yeah. It's like you have to almost like force yourself through. Someone who travels, yeah. Someone walks through it goes by alone. In other words, you can't walk with a whole entourage and behelim. and a concealed way. It's like that's what you use to sneak around. V'cheinu l'mayla. Same thing above. She'elechas v'hivas erein sof b'chinas tzimtzum v'helam. That it she'elechas. What did I say? She'elechas. She'elechas v'hivas. That it carries, it brings, and carries erein sof in a state of tzimtzum. Nikli b'shem nos nesiv. This is called a path. V'cheinu hamshachas b'chinas ha'atzmis l'vayir harotzen de mitzvus. V'yeh chochmah de Torah. Now he's going back to Torah. And this is also the hamshachas of atzmus to explain what is Torah. Torah is the wisdom of God. To explain the rotzen of the mitzvahs. He's clearly speaking about the chochmah of Torah, not the rotzen. So rotzen, as he said in the parentheses, doesn't have a local. Chochmah legab rotzen is yesh ma'ayin to motzah, nesiv. Chochmah Torah shebechinas nesiv mitzumtzum v'nelam. So when Torah is explaining the reasons behind the mitzvahs, chochmah is hamshachas bechinas atzmus. It's hamshachas of atzmus, but to explain the rotzen of the mitzvahs, this is the chochmah of Torah, which is a nesiv, a path that is concentrated, mitzumtzum, you could say contracted, and nelam, and concealed. It's a narrow fly. What?
Levayah is the explainer or what?
Levayah.
Levayah means
The will, yeah? The will of the mitzvahs.
No.
it's not beer, no. It's
I
Levayah.
didn't see how
Levayah haros.
Hamshachas b'chinas atzmus.
Doesn't make sense to say lebe'er.
That's Torah. Torah is to be Levayah the rotzen.
So we see that the wisdom of Torah is infinitely distant compared to Atzmus. This is what Torah this is what Torah is called. This is what Torah is called the written Torah. The Eisi Saksav Hari Udavar Nesef Alatzim. Not like Chikik. In other words, Torah Shebiksav. Why is it called Torah Shebiksav? Because written letters is a Davar Nesef. When you say written, it's like that's what he's saying. It's like a keshet. You're not talking about it. It's a separate thing. It's an addition. It's an imposed. It's a an additional component on the core. Like it's known the difference between written letters and engraved letters and written letters. The engraved letters. They're one personality. When you engrave letters, let's say out of stone, you didn't add ink on parchment. It's from the stone itself. You shaped and engraved the letters. It's the same zach. And it's not an additional thing. We learned this earlier as well. We learned two types of chikike. By contrast, letters of written letters, how do you davar nesif? You're taking ink and you're putting it on parchment. So it's an additional thing. Which means that the letters of the Torah, which is called Torah Shebiksav, and also the wisdom that manifests in the letters that we just learned, they're an additional thing on the core. That means that they are separate from one another. Now he goes back to his kashas. However, just like the spirit, the soul, unites and binds itself in Torah, as we spoke before, through learning, right, becomes completely united. The same thing, Torah. Even though it's a separate thing from Atzmus, nevertheless it gets encompassed and gets united by Atzmus in Atzmus, in Davar B'Davar, like you binding to one thing with another, Kedimyon Kesher HaNefesh B'Torah. Similar to the kesher, the bond that we spoke earlier of the nefesh in Torah. And this bond between of Torah in God, okay, so it's not just two separate. You could say, okay, Yisrael connects to Torah, Torah connects to the Eibishter. So he's saying now a new additional point. This is kashas of Torah as a dover b'fnei atzmei from Atzmus, from Kodesh B'richu, happens through the Yisrael. When the Yisrael binds itself to Torah, why? Ukamayim Razal da kol hakera b'Torah Kodesh Baruch Hu kera v'sheina kenegdei. Like the Maimon Razal, which we mentioned earlier, that someone who reads Torah, this God reads and studies Torah across you. Like me to connect it. That means to learning Torah properly. Kabbalah Mev is expression as if it's daf zu sein, really appropriately. The Hainu Bagdomis Ava Yira, with a preparation of the love and awe we spoke before, the two ksharim, and through binding his intelligence and his thought in Torah, through this he draws down the divine energy into Torah. 1 second. There's a lot more to learn here, because Bapashtas he's talking here the lower dimension of Torah, not the higher, not Shashrim Lefonov. But this is he's starting a whole new sugya now. Because till now he spoke about to understand Shashrim Lefonov, Amen, and Uman, and Aimon.
The Torah is Atzmus, like he said before.
Yeah. But right now he's talking about the Maimer Chazal, the Lashon Zayar. He's talking about how Torah comes out. He's clearly talking about how Torah manifests below, because Kol HaKedah V'Sheni Connected, if you remember, when you asked the question, it says Gimel Shos Shenis Ma Osakos Baruch is Yeshu Beis B'Torah, and here he says Kol HaKedah V'Sheni. Whenever you sit, not just the Gimel Shenis. So he said the Gimel Shenis is Atik. That's Pnimis HaTorah. That's Hashrim Lefonov, and Kol HaKedah is the Torah as it's. So he's clearly talking here. Our Torah is below. But fine, I wouldn't jump the gun. He's beginning a whole sugi here, and we're going to learn it. We're learning chapter by chapter. It's a tutzach celebrity frelo. That's the ikar. But now he started a new inyan. He's a new sugi now. To explain that, he's explaining it in detail now. He's going now to explain the whole picture. Yeah, but also said that Torah, there's also Torah, there's also Torah as it comes downward. Clearly, you could ask a question. What do you mean iskashus? He just said Torah is atzma. So what's mean iskashus? It's dveikus. But the Zohar says iskashus. That's what he's coming to explain. You have to have patience here. He's coming to explain that there's two dimensions in Torah. It's very clear. There's also going to be two dimensions in the Shomas. He's explaining the sugya of the mamutza of Torah. This is a very comprehensive picture of Torah. Let's learn the kitzur and we'll stop. Yeah.
It's not stumbling with the Torah.
Yeah, because remember, David HaMelech, it says, was mamshich, the mechaber kutchabrichu with Torah. It sounds to me that he's trying to lead to that also, that David did that. Maybe he's not going to mention it, but it's in my mind for sure he mentions it. Okay, let's learn now the kitzur. Now it's explained that Geras HaKedesh, that's the Kuntra Sachen. That Torah b'bchinas shashuim atzmi hu inyan amen oimon. Okay, there you go. It's two things. Very clear from the Kitzur right away that the core delights is both amen and uman. V'yesh leimer. What does that mean? Like he asked, what does that mean? If it's shashim lefonav, then it's not in the level of oiman, because higher than worlds. So it's not nurturing worlds. V'yashlem edahainu of his chabrus ha'atzmus im neshamis yisrael ha'teir. Yashlem, that's talking about the connection of atzmus with the souls through Torah. Remember, we said that the Torah has two roles: it creates and it connects the neshamis. That Torah liyesa atzmis hadiyakela.
At the end here,
It's not end. He started a new subject. He's elaborating and explaining it. He didn't finish the subject. He's not saying any opposite. The Rebbe Rashab knows he wrote this, and then he says, "Va'inyan hu." You have to read the right. Va'inyan hu. We're in the middle of Va'inyan. He didn't say Levayra Inyan. Look, it says. It says Va'inyan hu. Then he says Rabira Inyan. But there's don't give him the Inyan. He said that statement. He said, Torah being that it's a core to Atzmis thing, it's a container to Atzmis Ensof. And through Torah, it can be received, Atzmis can be received in the Shamas in the soul. So, like by Matan Torah, you've appeared, you've shown, you've revealed yourself. Mamish Riyah, actual seeing through Torah. The liyah shezeu ikar hakavana al kein nikra iman. And being that this is the primary kavana, that the Torah should connect neshamas to the Eibishter, That's what it's called Oimon. Va'ayin, now to explain this, I mean, look, you could see where he's going. He's going to explain how Teda connects first with us as separate things. And then it connects us to Shashim Lefonov as one thing. That's Bepashtus. Va'ayin, there are three bonds. It's interesting, he skips the word da b'da, but that's what it says. Tlas kishin, miskashron, da b'da. But there's three things that connect, miskashron, Yisrael, Araisu, Kishra. The three things, Yisrael, Teda, and the God. His kashus hu b'shnei dvarim. His kashus is possible only by two separate things. Mashenken, Ero Moyer, Hun Dvekus, Huinyan Dvekus. A source, a luminary, and its light are Dvekus, are a cleave. Ubabir Azeir, that Dvekus makiv is kashus pnimi. And Bir Azeir, he says that Dvekus is makiv, is more not internal, not intimate. Viskashus pnimi is intimate and internal. Yashlem shazel malmaila. That's malmaila. Or malmat malmaila Dvekus is agdus yeser. But from the perspective below, in other words, when you look at it directly from below, its Dvekus is a deeper unity. Bezehu shanashami im shenisav b'chinis yesh. That's when this is meaning that the Teda, even though it became im, that it was formed in a form of yesh, but Teda he chochmas alikis hariyhem iskashim zeim zeh, and Teda is not yesh. Teda is the divine wisdom. They become bind one to another, makif umukov, surrounding and being surrounded by. From Tanya, but tzarich li is beis ksharim zeh agdomas avir, and you need to have two dots. That's the preparation. That's the preface of love and awe in Teda. That's Yisrael and Teda. Now the Keshed also, v'chein ha-Teda shechoch b'kavyochel, keyach shechutz la'atzmus, he says here kavyochel. And Teda, which is wisdom, which is kavyochel, so to speak, a keyach, a force that's outside of atzmus, not like rotzen. V'aba rak yenik memazla, and Abba only nurses, suckles from the mazel, meaning it's only a unique, only a very narrow flow. V'zein nesivus, and that's paths. Nesivus ha-chochm, these are the paths of chochm and nesiv tzimtzum. A path is tzimtzum, it's a narrow, it's a limited flow. V'zehu teresh b'ksav the asis v'eir k'mei davar nesif, and that's a written Teda, that both the letters and the light and the chokhmah in the letters is like an additional element. V'arihu miskasheres ba'atzmus, and the Teda binds itself, ties itself to atzmus, like two separate things. V'hu aideis kashus neshamis Yisrael b'Teda shmamshichim b'atzmus ein sof b'Teda. And that's through the connection of Neshamas Yisrael and Teda, they draw down the Atzmus Ein Sof into Teda. Remember, let me make 1 point. 1 second. Don't stop it yet. It's the beginning of a whole sugya, and don't jump the gun. Remember, there's a whole sugya: is Teda Chosin and the Neshamas Kala, or is Teda Kala and the Neshamas are Chosin? So it's what we must be in Teda and what Teda must be in us. It's going to go through this whole thing. So there's a whole bunch of levels. Right now he's starting with Matla Maila. He started the bottom pashtus. We're a separate thing. We need to connect to Teda. Teda is a separate chokhmah, connects to Elokus. That's how it's Lamata. That's what we do when we sit down to learn. So he's going very Matla Maila now. And when we learn, what we learned so far is when we learn Teda, we mamshach Elokus in the Teda that's chokhmah, that's so called outside of obviously we're going to climb higher all the way to the source, but he's going now, that's what I'm saying, Bira'in, it's like almost a new chapter almost. And then he's going to come back and tie it together to understand the two dimensions of Teda and so on. It's if you ever want to have like Teda in its full intensity, learn these chapters. I mean, look, it's already a good 5, 6 or more we're talking about. We're talking about 6, 7 chapters on Teda. What is Teda? Which is what we're in the middle of. Okay, so we finished chapter 175. We paid pages 356 through 358. Yeah.
Thank you. Long as usual.
July 4th.
Yeah, I think stop it if you don't mind. Something happened, didn't stop.